Hello, I am Dominic Summers with the American Military University. Today, I am presenting U.S. federal policy on the treatment of animals to EVSP 508 Environmental Ethics, Fall Session 1, 2023. The treatment of animals is not a segment of environmental ethics often discussed by legislators, but it does have major agricultural and scientific implications within the United States. Human beings have interacted with animals since the beginning of time. However, the application of environmental ethics to animal treatment is relatively new. Federal legislation governing the treatment of animals is divided into two categories: domestic animals for human use and consumption, and wild animals. The Animal Welfare Act, ratified on August 24, 1966, is the only federal law in the United States that regulates the treatment of animals in research, teaching, testing, exhibition, transport, and by dealers. The original AWA was submitted by New York Representative Joseph Resnick as House Resolution 9743 prior to being signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. The act is enforced by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, specifically the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service and the Animal Care Program. The prevailing worldview found in the Animal Welfare Act is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism states that the rightness or wrongness of an action is determined by the goodness or badness of the results that flow from it. Simply put, the utilitarian view weighs the costs versus benefits and examines how activities influence the welfare of all of those involved. Utilitarianism supports that it may be morally acceptable to negatively impact the welfare of some animals if the action benefits the well-being of the greater public. This sentiment justifies the raising and slaughtering of animals, conduction of animal experiments, and other actions regulated by the AWA. Although the AWA is predominantly supported by utilitarianism, it also assigns intrinsic value to animal life, drawing from biocentrism and animal rights. The difference is that biocentrism and animal rights do not consider the overarching benefits of the action, while utilitarianism does. Also rooted in utilitarianism and similar to the AWA is the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act. The Humane Methods of Slaughter Act regulates the tools and techniques used to dispatch livestock without causing undue stress, fear, and pain to the animal. The HMSA recognizes the slaughter of animals as essential to human development, but still aims to minimize their suffering. The AWA is the predominant federal legislation that governs the treatment of animals for commercial use. However, there are other acts that protect wild animals from exploitation. Both the Lacey Act and the Endangered Species Act provide additional protections. The Lacey Act prohibits illicit wildlife trafficking and was the first federal law passed protecting wild animals. The Endangered Species Act protects species deemed threatened or endangered in an attempt to preserve the species and reestablish viable populations. Both of these acts are enforced by a variety of federal organizations, including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the National Marine Fisheries Service. The ethical premise for both the Lacey Act and the Endangered Species Act is biocentrism. Biocentrism provides an individualistic approach to environmental ethics and assigns intrinsic value to all living organisms. Biocentrism argues that all living beings, both human and non-human, have individual rights regardless of the perceived benefits they provide. Each living thing fulfills a niche within an ecosystem and thus deserves equal moral consideration. Overall, the United States federal government has been reluctant to implement animal treatment legislation unless benefits commerce or technological advancement, or the species faces a risk of extinction. The AWA, HMSA, the Lacey Act, and the ESA are all examples of federal policy containing various ethics on the treatment of animals. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. I hope that it was entertaining, thought-provoking, and informative.